Good afternoon, and welcome to the final installment of this summer's series of virtual Radcliffe Book Talks, which explore recent publications whose subjects or authors have a connection to the Harvard Radcliffe Institute. My name is Carol Oja, and I'm the William Powell Mason Professor of Music and American Studies at Harvard University and Faculty Director of the Humanities Program here at Radcliffe. At Radcliffe, we bring together scholars, artists, scientists, and practitioners to pursue research across the disciplines and engage with the issues of our time. Our book talk series is one of the ways we share that work with the public. And today I'm pleased to welcome and introduce renowned author and journalist Geraldine Brooks, who was the Vera M. Schuyler Fellow at Radcliffe in 2005-06. Geraldine Brooks is the author, most recently, of Memorial Days, a memoir of grief and loss, which she is sharing with us today. A Pulitzer Prize winning novelist, nonfiction writer, and former foreign correspondent, Brooks blends personal narrative and historical reflection in this meditation written after the sudden death of her husband, the writer Tony Horwitz, whom Brooks describes as way too busy living to have suffered his fate. Horwitz was also a Radcliffe Fellow in 2005-06 and a Pulitzer winner. Blending personal narrative with global reporting, this memoir offers a moving meditation on mourning and the shock of the unexpected. Her previous novels include March, People of the Book, Caleb's Crossing, The Secret Chord, and Horse, all New York Times bestsellers. Joining Geraldine Brooks in conversation today is Claire Massoud, who was a Radcliffe Fellow in 2004-05 and is also an award-winning author. Her novels have been named Best Book of the Year by numerous publications. Those works include, most recently, This Strange Eventful History, as well as The Emperor's Children, which was longlisted for the Man Booker Prize, The Woman Upstairs, and The Burning Girl. The discussion today will be followed by an audience Q&A. We encourage you to use the Q&A feature in Zoom to submit your questions at any time during the program, and the speakers will address as many as they can. Since we anticipate a lot of questions, we ask that you keep them short. This will enable Geraldine and Claire to get to as many as possible in the time we have. Before we begin, I want to take a moment to acknowledge the members of the Radcliffe Institute Leadership Society, and our annual donors who are watching this afternoon. Your generosity keeps Radcliffe programming free and open to the public, and we thank you. For today's program, we also gratefully acknowledge the Steiner Dean's Leadership Fund for Academic Ventures, which is supporting this event. Thank you for being here. It is now my great pleasure to give the virtual floor to Geraldine Brooks, who will offer a brief reading from Memorial Days before engaging in conversation with Claire Massoud. Enjoy.
May 27th, 2019, West Tisbury. Is this the home of Tony Horwitz? Yes. Who am I speaking to? This is his wife. That is exact. The rest is a blur. Collapsed in the street, tried to resuscitate at the scene, brought to the hospital, couldn't revive him. And so now he's in the OR. And so now we've admitted him for a procedure. And so now we're keeping him for observation. So many things that logically should have followed. But she says none of these things. Instead, the illogical thing. He's dead. No, not Tony. Not him. Not my husband out on the road energetically promoting his new book. My husband with the toned body of a 6-day-a-week gym rat. The 60-year-old who still wears clothes the same size as the day I met him in his 20s. My husband, younger than I am, hilarious, bursting with vitality. He's way too busy living. He can't possibly be dead. The resident's voice is flat, exhausted. She's impatient with me as I ask her to repeat what she has just said. It is, she tells me, the end of her shift. She gives me a number for the doctor who is coming on duty in this ER, 500 miles away in Washington, D.C. She can't get me off the phone fast enough. But Tony, I need to see him. Where will he be when I get there? We can't keep a body in the ER. It will be moved to the hospital morgue to be picked up by the DC medical examiner. A body. She means Tony. So how will I see him? I'm in Massachusetts on an island. It's going to take me hours to get there. She cuts me off. The DC police will need to talk to you. Make sure they can reach you. And then she's gone. That's the beginning of Memorial Days. And now I am going to invite the brilliant novelist, my fellow Radcliffe Fellow, and my dear friend, Claire Massoud, in conversation.
Hello, dear Geraldine. Thank you for that. That's an opener. That was a moment. Um, I'm so in awe that you could write it and that you could read it, and that you could share it with us. And I thought maybe we could start by talking a little about Tony, about that hilarious, vital, amazing guy, that you shared your life with for so long and loved so much, and that those of us who had the privilege of knowing him, there was nobody who couldn't help but love him. And he was hilarious, and he was amazing, and he was brilliant, and he was one of the most generous people I've ever known. And I wondered if you might tell us a little bit about Tony and about you and Tony. And I don't know where you'd like to start with that, but we can start.
We met when I came to New York City from Australia to attend Columbia University's Graduate School of Journalism. And we met up within a couple of days of arrival in the city, and it was on a balcony on the Upper West Side, a bunch of students getting to know each other. And he was telling funny stories. He was living with his brother down in Alphabet City, which was a rough corner of Manhattan in those days. And he had a car in New York, which was a crazy thing. And he had to buy his battery back on a regular basis, because one of the scams in Alphabet City was that people would steal your battery, and then you would go to the used parts dealer around the corner and buy it back like ransom. And I thought he was very funny. And the next day we had our big assembly of the class in the grandiosely titled World Room at the journalism school. And I saw him across the auditorium, this funny blonde, and I waved, and he didn't wave back. And I thought, well, you and the horse you rode in on. So, and I didn't think about him again for another 6 months. And then we found ourselves in the same class in the second semester. And I was just struck by his idealism. And also, I've got to admit, the beauty of his very muscly tanned forearms. And when we got together, he explained that he hadn't waved back that day in the World Room because he'd been out carousing with his brother the night before, and he'd dropped his glasses down the toilet at Danceteria, and he couldn't even see me.
Yeah, I love that story. It's a wonderful, of all the places for his glasses to be, right? It's fantastic. Well, we of course came to know each other. Well, you and I came to know each other a little bit later in a funny, but our husbands came to know each other first in a rather hilarious way. Also, not quite the glasses at Danceteria, but I don't know if you want to tell that story, or I could tell that story, but it was, what would it have been, 1995?
I don't know, but Martin Amos's the information had come out, and of course, part of the plot of that book is that the protagonist keeps thinking he's got rare diseases, and He's a hypochondriac. Anyway, James Wood, the great literary critic, had come to the New Republic, and he wrote a review. And
It was his very first piece for the New Republic. It was his
and
first.
Tony took issue with it, and he wrote a very snarky letter to the editor, which was published. And the last line of this snarky letter was, I would say more, but I've suddenly been struck with Tourette's syndrome.
Yeah, reading James Wood has given me Tourette's syndrome, I think.
Anyway, then some time passed, but not a great deal of time. But then for the next, I think, year, these books would arrive in the mail, and anytime a book about Tourette's syndrome came out, it would arrive in the mail for Tony with a little note saying, "With the compliments of James Wood." So these two guys were made for each other, actually. And when they finally met in person, of course, they hit it off.
It was, I feel that a sense of humor was a common sense of humor was always a shared pleasure. But you guys shared the whole world, and I wonder if I'm sure many people who are with us today are familiar not just with your amazing novels, but also with Tony's books and maybe with a little bit of the shape of your lives. But I wondered if you might give us just a little thumbnail, because you traveled continents and centuries and worlds of the imagination together. So
we did. We're very lucky in our fortunes, I think. Once we did fall in love with each other, it was right at the end of the semester at Columbia, and I had already accepted a job with the Wall Street Journal in Cleveland, Ohio, which I always think of as my first foreign assignment, because I had no intention of staying in the US, but I thought it would be a great experience to work at the Journal for a little while. And Tony had accepted an internship out on the West Coast, so it didn't look like this relationship was going to go very far. It looked like it might be a graduate school fling and nothing more, but Tony, on his way west, came to visit me in Cleveland. We had a wonderful weekend, and luckily for me, the radio in his car died right as he was leaving town. So he had to drive all the way across the country with nothing to distract him from thinking about what a great time he'd just had. And so a month later, he turned around and came back and found the closest job in journalism he could, which was Fort Wayne, Indiana, which was not super close, but we made it work. And then we were married within a year.
And then you lived all sorts of places. And I mean, one of the things that was part of your lives and is part of this Book of Mourning is this bifurcation. And obviously your lives involved many other continents and much of Europe and the Middle East and so on, and Africa. But this bifurcation in your lives between the US and Australia, which is your birthplace and where you grew up, and half the book takes place in the time of Tony's death and its aftermath, and half the book takes place in Flinders Island, which is off the coast of Tasmania in Australia. And I wondered if you wanted to say a little bit about those two places in your lives.
Yeah, it was the one thing in our marriage where we had a serious disagreement. I wanted to live in Australia, but Tony was American to his core. He was essentially an American historian at heart. And all his books were to do with, most of them were to do with relating American history to what's going on in this country today. And I think he was prescient about seeing the great divisions that were opening up in this country, and exploring why it is that our nation is so divided. So I think, this moment would not have come as a big surprise to him. He'd been preparing for it all his working life. So after he died, I was so overwhelmed with the bureaucracy of death and the responsibility of having two sons who are also, of course, grieving and looking after them, and all the unexpected things that landed on my head. And I really didn't have time to do the work of grieving. And I just went into this autopilot of performing a kind of normalcy that I didn't really feel, that I hadn't actually earned. So I'm playing this role of woman being normal for about 3 years, and it's exhausting. And at some point, I realized this can't go on. I have to. I'm not right in the head, and I have to do something drastic. And, I don't know why it took me 3 years to think of it, but what do writers do? They write, and that's how you figure out what you think. That's how you work through problems. And I decided that I would take myself out of all the noise of my life, away from the things I didn't want to do and away from the things I loved, and go to the most remote place I could think of. And that was Flinders Island, which is in the Bass Strait between the mainland of Australia and Tasmania. It's beautiful and it's very sparsely populated. And I found a shack and I went off to be alone and to do the work of grief that I hadn't had a chance to do. And on Flinders Island, I got into a pattern of trying to get back to that time when Tony died and to think it through and to experience the emotions that I hadn't allowed myself. And I would do that and write it all down in the morning. And then in the afternoon, I'd go for a long walk in nature or a long ocean swim, because I always find nature is curative for me. And then the book kind of fell naturally into that structure of the moment of his death and the immediate aftermath, and then the experience of what I noticed in nature when I had no distractions and I could notice things ferociously.
Would you be willing to read us another brief section? I wish you could read us the whole book, but even a few pages from the Flinders Island.
Yeah, I can do that. Flinders Island, porphyritic granite, coarse gravels, silica-rich soils, folded sedimentary sequences, scattered, scoured, angular blocks of siltstone, honeycombed by wind and sea, large cave feldspar phenocrysts, basalt xenoliths, the blue tear batholith, Upper Devonian period. There's nothing like a geological timeline to put you in your place. When the seas rose between 12 and 18,000 years ago, they left Flinders and the other Bass Strait Islands as all that remains of the land bridge that once linked the Australian mainland to Tasmania. 18,000 years is not that long in human generations. If you figure there are 4 generations every century, 40 every 1,000 years, about 700 generations have lived and died since this island became an island. I try to imagine each generational death. Who was mourned? Who was the mourner? When early death was ubiquitous, was the pain of loss any less? Or did the precarity of life make each loss even more painful? These are the questions raised by the rocks. A third of this island is rugged granite mountain range. I had not known this common rock could be so various, so beautiful. I imagine the seething earth that gave rise to these rocks, the searing heat, the molten ores, the cracking and hissing as solid earth forced through liquid ocean, the acrid fumes, the scalding ash, chaos and cacophony, slowly subsiding into solidity, into silence. The shack has some books on the natural history of the island, and I devour the chapters on its geology, repelling into caverns of unfamiliar vocabulary. Batholith, from the Greek for depth and stone, was coined by the Germans in the early 20th century and imported into English, that promiscuous word borrower, soon after. Phenocryst, also from the Greek. Phaneros, conspicuous, shining. Crystallos, gem. Phenocrysts are show-offs, 5 times bigger than surrounding crystals in the rock. I wonder if diamonds are phenocrysts. When I look it up, I learn that the answer is no. They're xenocrysts, foreign gems, carried up from the Earth's mantle, torn off the sides of the magma pipes, surging up through the crust. When Tony and I married, I wore a diamond ring that had belonged to his great-grandmother, Bubby Rose. There hadn't been an engagement ring. I hadn't wanted one any more than I wanted the other expensive trappings of the wedding industrial complex. I bought an inexpensive off-the-rack outfit, a white Angora sweater over a lacy slip dress. My sister and I did all the cooking at her home on a hillside in France. To satisfy secular French law, we were married by the mayor in the 16th century village town hall, and then a rabbi wed us again in my sister's garden among the lavender and the broom, with just 15 people in attendance. The huppah was a tallit strung on pieces of dowling we bought the day before at the local bricolage. I'd forgotten to pack nice shoes, so those too were bought last minute and pinched my toes all day. But I was glad to wear that fancy diamond ring in its antique platinum setting. Tony's mother, Ellie, gave it to me just before the wedding. It signified my acceptance into a lineage of women who had endured, survived, and prospered against huge odds. Survivors of pogrom and exile. Immigrants, matriarchs.
Thank you. Thank you so much for reading that. In that relatively brief passage, I feel there are so many threads to pursue and to talk about. And you know, one of them is your amazing ability, and it's an ability that you have. You are like a rock. You are incredibly resilient. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met. Which isn't to make light of the grief and suffering in any way, but to say that you always have, you refer to it as a, I think, is it not quite shrill, but at some point early on, you have a voice basically saying to you, buck up, you know.
Stop wallowing, stop wallowing.
Stop wallowing. Yeah, yeah.
Another voice. She was a great foe of wallowing.
And I so in this passage, there's the way in which, almost like a drone or a spaceship, you rise above and see the eternity, right, in the rocks. You see the great history. You see, you know, you say there's nothing like geological timeline to put you in your place, and at the same time, that resilience and that sort of almost push to be resilient, which is I don't know if it's innate to you, but or acculturated super early. I don't know, one or the other, but it is what, it's both what enabled you to get through the early time after Tony's death, and it's what meant that at his memorial service you couldn't cry. And I wondered if you might talk about that balance in yourself, between a sort of superego that's very resilient, and then what the book is a record of, which is finding the space for the most vulnerable parts of you too.
Yeah, you know, it's always been front of mind that this is coming for all of us. None of us are getting out of this alive, and none of us are getting out of it without tremendous loss. It's the one thing, the most fundamental thing we have in common with people we have nothing else in common with. And particularly after 10 years as a foreign correspondent in some of the toughest places in the world where people have literally nothing, places that are poor beyond the harsh yardstick of the poor world, having seen so much suffering, so much displacement, and yes, starvation and the effects of war, it seemed very indulgent to be able to take the time to express this great love and loss. And I'm very cognizant of the position of super privilege from which I was able to do that.
And yet at the same time, I mean, I think one of the many things that's so powerful about Memorial Days, and indeed about other very beloved books, you know, in a similar genre, C.S. Lewis or Joan Didion's book, The Year of Magical Thinking, or Elizabeth Alexander's memoir. Also, I mean, I think is that that to know that it lies in wait for, you know, that's where we will all end up. It doesn't alleviate the intensity and profundity of each person's experience. So for you to share that is actually a privilege for your readers. And one of the things I wanted to, I mean, there are many things I want to ask you about. One I wanted to ask you about is I don't want us to miss out on talking about your analysis of some of the failures of our culture's approach to death or way of handling death. So I'd like to come to that. Well, why don't we go there? Because I feel like I'm too, and we'll come to the other thing in that. But what I mean, that's because that's very much, you know, that's very much part of this book too, is a sort of look at all of the different cultures and the ways that they approach death, and ours isn't looking too good in that context.
It's not looking too good. We've lost the plot on this, I think. And I think it's different for people who are profoundly religious and who belong to a religious tradition and community. If I was an Orthodox Jew, I would have had a very specific path to tread, and every step of it would have been laid out for me. And as I, you know, looked into that tradition in more detail than I had previously, I found out it's extremely insightful. And one of the biggest insights is that in the first 28 to 48 hours after a death, you don't even offer condolences because the grieving person is not in any condition to be consoled. So you just run around behind them doing the practical matters that you can do. That's the task of the community. And then there's Shiva, which is the official kind of the allowed period for wallowing, where you do nothing but really reflect on the dead person, accept condolences, and everything is done for you. You don't get up, basically, during that period, and then you're escorted out and you go back into your normal life. And for everybody except children, that there's an extension, but it's not a tremendously arduous set of things after that. But if you're not in that tradition, if you're not in any tradition, the world doesn't give you a minute. Our modern lives are complicated. And I kind of started to think about, my God, my life is a bunch of flaming torches that I am juggling. And if I let one fall, it's going to set fire to the whole structure. And I can't let that happen because of my kids. And I can't let Tony down. I can't take this lovely, you know, structure that he built to secure our future and blow it because of my inattention. So instead of being able to grieve and mourn, I had to deal with lawyers and accountants and make decisions that I was in no state to be making. And it just somehow, it's like It's like somebody just sticks the shiv in and twists it and twists it. You just don't get a minute for the necessary work that your psyche requires.
So, I mean, what, I feel for me as reading the book that you, excuse me, you're addressing all of these different layers, the spiritual, the emotional and familial, the sort of human, and then also the practical. And we were laughing before we joined the group about our our longtime shared accountant that you guys sent us to.
Well, Tony sent you because I didn't have it. I didn't, that was one of the problems. We had a very bifurcated set of responsibilities in the marriage, and it was all about your interests and your aptitudes. So I did everything you could see, and he did everything you couldn't see. So the accountant, that's on him.
But
Anyway, the guy, he's a very eccentric man. Just
yes, but I feel like just in a way, you actually end up, I think it's in the afterword, or certainly at the very end of the book. One of the things that is almost a little surprising, because the book is so emotional and has such beautiful lyrical writing, both about nature and about emotional human. And then there's a little bit of a like, by the way, a little practical. I don't know if you want to, now that you have a wrapped audience, if you just want to share that with a little of that practical advice, because it's actually real.
Yeah, because his death was absolutely so sudden. And I think, many people who experience loss have a little bit more warning. But if somebody, we use the expression drop dead. And now I know what it really means. He's walking down the street alive, and the next minute he's not. And because of the suddenness, we were completely unprepared. And if it had have been me, there would have been things in our life that he would have had no clue on. Like, I'm sure he doesn't know where the valve is to turn the water off if we have a leak. I'm sure he doesn't know where the kids' vaccine records are, or even perhaps what their pediatrician's name is, because that was in my bag of tasks. And the things that were in his bag of tasks were the taxes and investments and retirement and all that stuff. And, I didn't pay attention to it because he was really good at it, thank goodness. And then suddenly, oh my God, where is it? I don't know. How does it work? Why did he make the decisions he did? How did he know how to do this? Why did he have puts on the necktie? What's a put? What's the necktie? Anyway, he was a great maker of lists. And when I came home from this terrible, harrowing trip to Washington, D.C., under one of the many baskets of baked goods and flowers that had been kindly left in my kitchen, I find his last note list, which was what he intended to do after book tour. And the very first item on that list was fire accountant. And I panicked because he could do that. I couldn't, because I knew nothing about our finances. And, as a feminist, I'm really disgusted at myself for letting myself fall into that predicament.
But I think, the as you mentioned earlier, that sense of the torches being flaming. I mean, the account, you have to file taxes every year. And then there was health insurance. You guys ended up
canceled it. They threw us off our health insurance without even informing me. And I just kept paying the exorbitant amount that self-employed people have to pay for themselves and their kids. I just kept writing the checks. I had no idea it wasn't covering anything. And thank God none of us had a catastrophic accident, because we weren't covered at all. And that's just a particular brutality of the American system.
Yeah.
But my credit cards were all canceled because Tony was the main account holder. And the things that you do not want to be thinking about are your credit cards. But I knew if everything was on auto pay on them, and if I didn't get that sorted out, our bills wouldn't get paid.
So to come back, thank you for the practical, because one of the things you didn't sort of Geraldine provides with a sort of list, sort of make sure you provide that for your partner imagine the unimaginable, and make sure that those things are written down somewhere, which is a piece of wise advice, and made me think I need to do that, at my house too. But I wanted to return in a way to you and the writing of this book, and you said earlier, I'm a writer, that's what I do. I that's how I think, it's how I experience things. And I wondered whether, and this is so different from, you've written other memoirs, but this is so different from those too.
Well, this was a book that I didn't write thinking reader.
Right. So I wanted to ask you about that.
This was a book I wrote entirely for myself. This was what I did instead of hiring a therapist. And, I didn't even know if what I wrote would be publishable, whether it would be of any interest to anybody else. I just needed to do it. And so that's why it's different, I guess, because it was, in a way, it was a private undertaking. Yeah.
But there is there's that thing that, and you talk wonderfully about Tony being an extrovert in all sorts of ways, and you being more introverted. There's the writing, and then there was a moment where you thought, okay, I will publish it and I will share it. And we talked earlier about, like, it's hard to talk about this book. It's hard to and I wondered about that experience, if you had anything to say about it, really.
Well, I put it down to my frugal Irish grandmother who couldn't stand waste of any kind. So given that I had written it, I thought, I'm going to put this out in the world. But I was very reluctant when I contemplated speaking about this book. I was afraid. And usually I really enjoy book tours. I know we've discussed this and we have a slight difference of opinion on this, but I love getting out of my room after being alone in a room for the whole, the time that it takes to write a novel, and then to take it out on the road and be in touch with readers and booksellers of my favorite people. And I enjoy it, and I'll do it forever. I will, I'll go until they stop asking for me. Not for this book. I thought it would be really hard, and it was hard. It wasn't as hard as I thought, because I decided that I would only do a very limited number of events, and I would only do them with people who knew Tony very well. And so it was really an excuse to talk about Tony, and I love talking about Tony. And so it wasn't as bad as I thought.
Well, I'm glad of that. I'm glad of that. Yeah. And it is wonderful to have a chance to talk about Tony. I wanted in a way to ask that, because there's a very beautiful passage in the Flinders Island, one of the Flinders Island sections, about where you suddenly start to wonder if you're becoming addicted to solitude, and then you say, but no, actually, what this has been is a chance to be with Tony. And for him, and very beautifully, you say, one of the things you say is, and for the thing that I thought had been taken from me with his death, to learn more about him.
Well, yes, I had his journals, and they were his private journals, and I, of course, would not have invaded his privacy, but I decided that it was okay at this point. And so I did learn a thing or two, particularly about his life before we got together, which was hilarious.
And did you, I think, one of the things that's complicated about words, I find, my last novel was based on some sort of family stuff, and I read letters, and I loved being with no longer living relatives in their words, right? People are alive in their words, and the sentences, they're fully present just in their syntax. It's like handwriting, the way that I'm sure the way Tony is writing in his journal, that's his voice, and you hear him.
Right. And may I just say that it is the most extraordinary novel that you wrote, that you
Thanks.
did the alchemy of the novelist on your family's experiences.
Thank you. But what I was going to say is, I think there's this strangeness too, because words are also fixing things. So I wondered if that was something, that I sometimes feel that when at least when I'm writing something from a memory, it's like I put a pin in the butterfly, and then the butterfly is there, but it's fixed. And I wondered, because I feel as though there's a great delicacy in this memoir, between telling things and then there's a lot of white space. Like silence is also, you're leaving room for things to echo, and to keep breathing and changing. And I wondered if that was conscious, or if it was just the way that it came.
I think it was the way that it came, and I didn't, I had it in my mind that I would go for 40 days, because that's this magical number that people go off into deserts for. And it's the old idea of quarantine and all those things. And I didn't end up needing 40 days in the end. There was a point where I started to feel like the big bag of trash that I'd carried with me to Flinders Island, that all the emotional garbage, I'd been able to unpack it piece by piece. And the biggest chunk that was the most helpful to put down was to give up mourning the life that I had expected to have with Tony. This life I had imagined, where we, in our dotage, would never miss a really good sunset, and where we would have a house that faced west and had two rocking chairs. And we'd reminisce about all the funny stuff and the weird experiences that we'd had when we were banging around and vagabonding through war zones, and all the experiences that we'd shared, and I thought, we were still feeling very young and vigorous, and our kids had barely, left the nest. And I thought we'd had a lot more adventures together. And I was really in deep mourning for that life. And I finally accepted on Flinders Island that life was gone. I was not getting that back. And I just had to take the life that I have and make it as vivid and meaningful as I can. And once that happened, I kind of realized I was ready to go home.
Oh, it's very powerful. I was going to ask you, and I feel you've just spoken about it. I mean, healing, the idea that, the experience of healing is very much part of this book, not in some way that it's a complete, and now, that's folded up and put away. But
no, grieving doesn't stop. Grieving was never going to stop. But I was able to come home and actually feel normal instead of pretending to feel normal. Yeah.
Yeah. It's I think in one minute we will open it to the audience. I wondered if you, just one little quick question I might ask is, the book Horse, it travels through this book, because that's what you were working on when Tony died, and you've had to finish it, and you felt
well, for a year I couldn't. You of all people will know what it takes, what a rabbit hole you have to be down to complete a novel. And that was a hard book anyway. I almost gave up on it, and Tony held my feet to the fire on it and said, that I was exaggerating the difficulties, and encouraged me enormously and helped me a lot with archival material, because he was a brilliant deep diver of archives. Archivists loved him and would hand over everything. Anyway, because he'd helped me and because he loved this idea of the book, and he doesn't love he hadn't loved the one before, which is set in Second Iron Age Israel, and he thought was more like mythology than a historical novel. So this one he loved, and so I felt like I need to finish this book so I can dedicate it to him. So eventually I crawled back to my desk, and once I got back to work, that was very helpful. I think work, actually, that's what I do now. Basically, don't do anything else, just work. And it's very therapeutic for me.
So one of the questions, so we could move now to questions from the audience, and one of the questions is in fact about Horace, which I'm sure many in the audience are great lovers of, and one of the audience, not about the writing of that book later, but how it came about and where it came from for you.
Oh, well, it was a product of my midlife crisis. I had never been on a horse, and I was in my early 50s, and I went to a writer's retreat on a lovely ranch in Santa Fe, and they're just outside my room there were the corrals with all these beautiful Appaloosa and paint horses, and I love animals, so I was just admiring them, and one of the wranglers said, you really like the horses, you should come on a trail ride. And I said, I can't ride. And he said, yes, you can. These horses know their job. They won't let you fall. And so the next day, I'm cantering along a cliff edge of a gorgeous arroyo in New Mexico and having an ecstatic experience. And I get back home to Martha's Vineyard, and a young friend comes over a few nights after I returned. And I told her how much I loved this experience. And she looked out the window and she said, you've got a couple of acres. You could have a horse. In fact, I could give you my horse. Well, I should have asked a lot more questions than I did. The horse was not close by. The horse was in Mexico. So it took a while to get this horse, but it didn't matter because the horse is beautiful. And I knew that because she'd been in an ad, and she was in an ad for a fast-acting cream to treat vaginal yeast infections.
That's unexpected.
Palomino galloping across the Mexican Altiplano voiceover. Some things should be fast. Anyway, I got the horse, and then I couldn't think about anything except the horse. I became the 5-year-old horse girl in my 50s. And I was always either at a riding lesson or meeting the farrier or the saddle fitter or something. I wasn't getting any work done on my novel. And luckily for me, I went to a donor lunch at Plymouth Pawtuxet Museum because they'd been super helpful to me when I was researching Caleb's Crossing. And I was seated down the table from a guy from the Smithsonian who just delivered the skeleton of the greatest racehorse of the 19th century from an attic forgotten in the Natural History Museum to pride of place in the Museum of the Horse in Lexington, Kentucky. And as he told the story of this horse, and he got up to the part about what had happened to the horse during the Civil War, my lunch was uneaten. My donors had not a scintilla of my attention, and I knew I had my next novel.
And how long had you been working on it when Tony died and there was a year hiatus?
Ages.
Yeah.
It's embarrassing how long that book took to write.
Yeah. But you did it, and it's amazing. And as am I right? Did you say it actually perhaps has more happy readers even than?
I think it's been my most immediately popular book, and for which I am very grateful, and I'm very grateful that Tony didn't let me give up on it.
Another audience member asks, until your grandchildren are old enough to read Tony's books, how will you help them have a sense of knowing what a special person he was?
If only I had grandchildren.
But their future, you mentioned in the book your future grandchildren.
I do mention it, but my sons are 29 and 22, and we got started very late because we honestly having a meaningful and exciting life as foreign correspondents, and that's not really compatible with having a family. So I was 39 years old when I was in the slammer with the Nigerian secret police interrogating me, and I didn't know how long they were going to keep me. And I thought, 39 years old, you blew it. You know, if they keep you for very long, you're never going to have a family. So anyway, I was very lucky. I came home, greeted Tony enthusiastically, and that's my 29-year-old. But you know, neither of them are even with partners yet. So I don't know about this grandchild question, but seriously, stories, you know, before they can read, I'll tell them stories. And I'm just sorry because that doesn't make up for the funny Zeta that he would have been, the outrageous one, the crazy one, the one that would let them do anything. I mean, he would have been an incredible grandfather. Even with our young nieces at the Seder table, he was the one throwing the cherry tomatoes across the table when the Seder reader wasn't looking.
He had a lot of the kid in him, you know.
He did.
Yeah, yeah. So another audience member has asked, did you write Memorial Days in order, or did you write, or how did the book come together?
Yeah, just like as I was describing earlier, working in the morning on my, you know, emotional baggage, writing about trying to relive what had happened, but relive it feeling it. So that writing would happen in the morning, and then whatever it was that I noticed in the afternoon when I was spending time in nature, in the bush or at the beach or climbing rocks, all the things that I did with my time on Flinders Island. And I would come back and write that down like a journal. And so that's how it fell into the shape that it did. And it was in order, yeah.
It was in order. Another question, do you think you'll live in Australia again?
Well, now that my youngest is in college, I'm able to sneak over there for 5 months a year, which is very nice. And let's see how those midterms go, and then I'll answer that question.
But it's something that you talk about early in the book that you might not have spent much time here were it not for Tony.
I wouldn't have. I think I would have worked, who knows, but you know, I always thought that, oh, I'm going to have this adventure and then I'll go back to Sydney and get on with my real life. So it's fun to sleep with foreigners, but it does leave you following different life trajectories.
Well, it's it always, you for a very long time when Natty, your first son, was small, until school really kind of nailed you down, you guys managed to.
Yes, we did. We managed to get back to Australia for large chunks of time. I kept thinking I could turn Tony into an Australian, but alas, failure.
He wasn't having it. Another audience member asks, could you share any thoughts relating to Judaism and Jewishness on what it means and feels like for you to be a Jewish woman in the 21st century?
Well, that's a very big question. So for reasons that have to do with my father being an opaque guy, I was always trying to figure out what interested him, what made him passionate. And he was very passionate about Israel, which was a strange thing because he wasn't Jewish. But when the Six-Day War happened, I think I was, I don't know, I'm not very good at math, 11 probably. And he was obsessed with it, and he would bring the newspapers home, and he had been in what was then Mandate Palestine during World War II. And he got, because he was a leftist, he got absolutely obsessed with the kibbutz movement, and he thought that that was the answer for our century and how we should all live. And he was he was a singer, and he used to go and sing to the children from the children's houses of the kibbutzim. So it was very vivid to him, and I was interested in what interested in him. And then I became obsessed with the history of the Jewish people. And to the extent that even though I was attending Catholic school, and in Australia you have little cute Catholic school uniform with a hat and gloves and the whole deal, I used to wear a Star of David, and
as a schoolgirl.
yeah, and drag around a dog-eared copy of the Rise and Fall of the Third Reich and the history of the Inquisition. And I was the only kid in the New South Wales school system that wrote the final paper on the Suez Crisis. Yeah, so I was anyway, when I fell in love with a guy named Horwitz, I hadn't really met any Jews that I knew of. I didn't know Horwitz was a Jewish name. But when we decided to get married, I wasn't going to be the end of the lineage that had survived pogrom and Shoah, and Judaism passed through the maternal line, which is very pragmatic, I think. And so as a gesture to history, I converted. And Jewish teaching is very significant in my life. I'm not a deist, but when I go to shul, I relate to the service because the Torah is really human beings struggling with meaning and the big questions of purpose. And at the thing I like the best is at the climax of the service, you bow to a book. I'm absolutely fine with that.
Thank you. Maybe there's several people here who are asking what you're working on now, and I wondered if you might be able to tell us a little about what
I can tell you what I just have been working on, and I wouldn't have been able to 3 days ago, but they announced it, and they announced my role in it, which kind of surprised me because I was the collaborator on Kamala Harris's new book that's coming out in September called 107 Days, which is, I think, say it as shouldn't possibly, a riveting account of the historic campaign, a blow-by-blow TikTok of what it was like to run for president in only 107 days against Donald Trump.
It's amazing. That will be an amazing book, and amazing that you have never done anything like that before. And I wondered if you have it. I mean, you may feel you have nothing to say about it, but just what is it like to collaborate intensely in that way?
Well, I don't know if it would be like this with a different person or with a different purpose. But it was a wonderful experience. It was harrowing at times. It was getting to know her has only reinforced to me the tragic mistake that this country made last November. I mean, I felt it before, but now I know it in deep ways. She would have been an excellent president, and we blew it.
Oh dear, I feel we can't end there. We can't end there. Maybe you could in 30 quick, we're not supposed to go over, and I have a little something to say. 30 seconds, what you're working on now, next.
Next is a novel. It's nothing too ambitious, just a history of Western thought and its journey towards inclusion.
Fantastic, fantastic. We cannot wait. Thank you so much, Geraldine.
Thank you.
Thank you. This concludes our program today. I want to thank Geraldine Brooks for your reading and this fascinating conversation. And I want to thank our audience for your terrific questions. Today's program has been recorded. It'll be posted on the Radcliffe website in about a week. For information about upcoming Radcliffe programs and to see videos of past events, including all of this summer's book talks, please visit radcliffe.harvard.edu. Thank you again for joining us today, and take care.